For the last 3 years at least, if not from literally the launch of the Switch, we have been hearing rumors about a Switch Pro, speculation about the next generation Switch, what comes after Nintendo's really, really successful hybrid console. Well, that's what we need to discuss today because things are not likely going to be like you expect. Let's get into it. Nerd Grave. Alright, so as many of you know, I was an early adopter of the Valve Steam Deck, this beautiful little device right here. The Valve Steam Deck was for a lot of people what they wanted the Nintendo Switch to be, the Switch Pro that they never got. And if you take a look at some of the specifications, and I'm not going to get too down the rabbit trail of quoting numbers here, but the Nintendo Switch outputs theoretically at 720p in handheld and 1080p in docked for some games where possible. The Steam Deck actually displays at 800p, which is not really any higher than the 720p. 800p is just because of the different aspect ratio. The Switch here is a 16:9 format, where the Steam Deck is 16:10, which gives it slightly more screen real estate. So in handheld mode, they are pretty similar as far as the resolution, but that's where the comparison stops. The Steam Deck is much, much more powerful, and I think that's what a lot of people really wanted from the Switch. They just wanted it to be more powerful. However, everybody these days is talking, and we have been talking for the last couple of years, about things like DLSS and active super sampling and all this kind of stuff, giving the Nintendo Switch a 4K treatment. And everybody seems to think, okay, well, the PS5 is 4K, and the Xbox Series X is 4K, and we even had 4K options on the PS4 and Xbox One. Surely we're going to finally get 4K on the Nintendo Switch. Well, I don't think so, because I'm pretty sure that Nintendo is going to maintain this hybrid approach for their next console. Whether we get a Pro in the next year or two, I'm speculating we might see something next year with the launch of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. If not, this generation is getting pretty long in the tooth, and sales are starting to slow down for the Nintendo Switch, so I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that sometime within the next year or so, within 2023, or at the latest by, I would say, March 2024, we're going to see something else coming down the pipeline from Nintendo. And what is that going to be? I mean, we need to really dive into that. Do we think that Nintendo is going to stay the course at this point and give us another Switch-like device, or do we think they're going to go off in left field like they did with various other consoles, like they have done with things like the GameCube to the Wii and the Wii to the Wii U, trying to create some new gimmick, some new thing to bring in that new audience again? There seems to be a fear with Nintendo that if they just do an updated iteration of their old console, kind of like, the experience they had with the Wii U, where it was different, but not different enough. Nintendo seems to be leery of that and really want to throw a curveball with every new generation. But let's assume for a minute that they're not insane and they see how popular the Switch has been and how popular the form factor of a hybrid handheld game console, something like this that I can play on the couch, but I can hook up to my TV or my computer monitor and play on a larger screen. That form factor is a winning form factor for Nintendo, and let's just assume that they're smart enough to understand that they need to stick with that form factor for the next generation. Let's just assume that. What are we going to get? Well, we can take a close look at the Nintendo Switch, which is underpowered. It was underpowered when it came out 6 years ago, but when it first came out, it was virtually the only hybrid option on the landscape, in the gaming landscape. And people were blown away at games like Mario Odyssey and Zelda Breath of the Wild. Absolutely blown away that they could have these experiences on the go, whether they were in bed or whether they were on a park bench or on the bus. And then games came along like the Skyrim port and the Witcher 3 port and Doom Eternal and things like that that really blew people away and really pushed the Switch's technical abilities to the absolute limit with what we have come to call these impossible ports, right? The impossible ports, the games that you would never think. Will it run Crysis? Yes, it actually does run Crysis. So the Switch has been amazing, but this past year, 2022, it has been completely overshadowed by the Steam Deck and by other competitors in the market. We've got things like the GPD Win, the One X Player, the Aya Neo Next, all of these other handheld devices in the market now, which are trying to grab on to some measure of the success that the Switch had. And they've all, they've had their ups and downs, but the Steam Deck is the market leader for sure. And what the Steam Deck offers is the ability to play pretty much any game that you might want to play. Pretty much any game that runs on the PS4 or the PS5. Pretty much anything on Steam is going to run in some capacity on the Steam Deck. Now, of course, because it is a smaller device, a handheld device, it doesn't have a 4090 in it, of course. It's got RDNA 2 graphics built into it, which is basically system on a chip, integrated graphics, and it's amazing what they can do with that. But let's assume that the Switch goes with an RDNA 2 or an RDNA 3 type architecture. What could we expect out of the Switch? The Steam Deck is vastly more powerful than the Switch. I can run things like Cyberpunk 2077 at 30 to 40 frames a second on the Steam Deck at its native 800p resolution. When I try to hook it up to the TV, however, I can't even get 1080p on Cyberpunk 2077 at a stable 30 frames a second. The resolution is really, like so many people in this day and age, it's the constant fight between, is it 4K or is it 60 frames a second? And even on your PS5, we're seeing the current gen games constantly coming out one after another with problems. Things like Gotham Knights that came out a couple of months ago where, everybody was expecting it to be 60 frames a second and it was 30, locked at 30 if you're lucky. So many games have a performance mode and a fidelity graphics mode where you have to choose between a better frame rate or better resolution or enable ray tracing at the cost of frame rate, for example. Even the PS5 can't give us true 4K 60 with ray tracing in most situations unless the game is incredibly well optimized for that particular piece of hardware. So what we're looking at with the Switch is they're probably going to upgrade to a new hybrid model, a new handheld, whether you call it a Switch Pro or a Switch 2, or whether they come up with some other fancy name where they tack on some other gimmick, but it's basically the same hybrid format. It's going to be more powerful, but I have my doubts, Nintendo being Nintendo, whether they're going to achieve the 4K that everybody keeps talking about. Everybody keeps thinking, okay, they're going to have some kind of a chip in the dock or something. We know the most recent dock that came out with the OLED Switch has a chip inside that nobody really understands what that chip is for. It can receive firmware updates and stuff, and people thought perhaps that could be used for some kind of upscaling or something of that nature. But that's not very likely, and certainly not with this particular Switch model. But anyway, when we see the next Switch iteration, it is very likely that it is going to be significantly more powerful. It's probably going to run existing Switch games. Let's hope it's backwards compatible and that it runs existing Switch games that are already struggling. Games like Bayonetta 3, struggling big time. Xenoblade Chronicles 3, struggled a bit. We even had games like Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, which, a lot of people criticized as just performing particularly badly, especially with all of these different characters on screen in that kind of Warriors game. Just disappointing. So we're hoping as consumers, that the Nintendo Switch, the new one, will be able to run these games much, much better, and that we can maybe get some next-gen patches for games like Breath of the Wild and, that sort of thing, to see these games in a higher resolution. But do we really think the Nintendo Switch, the new Nintendo Switch, when it comes out, do we really think that it's going to achieve 4K even when docked? I don't think so. The fact that the Steam Deck came out this year, and we look at other devices like the Ayaneo Next that has a 1080p handheld screen, and games even in 1080p on these handheld devices are struggling with performance at 1080p. If I try to get 4K out of my Steam Deck, I can get 4K out of it, but it's a miserable mess in anything but a very retro or a very indie game. I can run something like RetroArch on my Steam Deck and, theoretically upscale, an SNES game up to 4K or something if I want, and that works fine. Some indie games I can get 4K out of Cult of the Lamb on the Steam Deck, for example. Fairly simple graphical games, 2D games that don't have a lot going on in terms of 3D worlds to load in and that sort of thing. But let's not remember, the Switch has 4 gigs of RAM, if I remember correctly. And the Steam Deck has 16 gigs of RAM. And that RAM is way faster RAM than the Switch RAM, too. And it still struggles at even 1080p. So let's manage expectations, folks. All of you out there thinking we're going to get a 4K Nintendo product anytime in the near future, I don't think it's going to happen. Even the existing Switch barely hits 1080p. We're getting all kinds of games docked that run at 900p. Even Breath of the Wild only runs at 900p docked. And that was basically a launch game. What can we realistically expect? And this is what I've really been interested in. What can we realistically expect for the Nintendo Switch in the next generation, or if we get a Pro upgrade similar to that new 3DS XL that we got at the end of the 3DS's lifespan? Well, I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that Nintendo may try to keep the OLED and go for a 1080p panel in handheld. And I think we may start to get some games that push 1440 resolution out of the new Switch, if we're lucky. I think 1080p is pretty much what we can expect out of the most AAA type game ports that we get going forward. What are they going to have in this thing? I think we may see Nintendo. They don't typically go after the performance, the technical specs. So, they do have to keep up to a certain degree to be able to allow some third-party ports to continue to come to the system. But I think it's very, very unlikely that we're going to see the performance of a PS5, which arguably the PS5 can barely do 4K reliably, at least not 4K 60. Sometimes it even struggles with 4K 30, depending on the game and how it's optimized. So, for you guys out there that have been on the Switch Pro bandwagon, on and off of it as all the rumors and leaks come out for the last 3 years, we need to manage our expectations. Even with some of these upscaling softwares and algorithms like DLSS and that sort of thing that exist out there, I think it is highly unlikely that we are going to be achieving 4K resolution in the next generation as a regular basis on the Nintendo Switch. I don't know, guys. What do you think the next version of the Nintendo Switch is going to be, and what do you think it's going to be capable of? I'm pretty interested to hear your opinion on this, because after spending all of 2022 with my Steam Deck and realizing that this thing is light years more powerful, absolutely light years more powerful than the Switch, literally 15 times better than the Switch in terms of raw power. Maybe not 15 times, but mind-blowingly powerful in comparison, and it still has limitations. The Steam Deck won't give me good 4K. The Steam Deck is about as powerful as a launch PS4, maybe a little bit more powerful than the launch PS4. And, the Switch is basically, a PS3 with a little extra horsepower in terms of, most of the ports that we get from it are, PS3 ports, things like The Witcher 3 and Skyrim and stuff. And they run great. And they look like PS3 games, are slightly enhanced PS3 games. If we, honestly, if we could even get the Switch to the Steam Deck level in the next generation, and even that I think is unlikely. But even if we could get the Switch to the PS4 level, like solidly to the PS4 level, where it can run even 1080p 60 continuously on just about any game, and maybe 1440 here and there, I think I would be pretty happy. I don't know about you guys. Let me know down in the comments below, what do you expect out of your next generation Nintendo product? I'd be interested to start a conversation here, because rumors have been circling for years and years, and everybody's sick and tired of talking about the rumors. But at this point, 6 years into the generation, there is definitely a new piece of Nintendo hardware on the horizon. What do you want it to be? Thanks so much. Talk to you.